Don't kill me. Forgive us. I swear in my life, it was John. He convinced us we were doing the Lord's work. I can't believe what we did. There was a long pause before 30-year-old ex-Civil War veteran turned bounty hunter Carson Saphrona then heard the man cry out, "Dear God, what is that?" It startled him as he stood up from his makeshift bed, grabbing his pistol from the holster that was next to him as he slowly walked towards where he'd heard the man. It was September 8th, 1872, and Carson was on his way to California trying to collect the $1,000 reward put on Albert Kleist's head, who was wanted for grand larceny when he stopped in Mountain Meadows, Utah, for the night, making camp in the tall junipers on one of the surrounding hills. What happened that night was mysterious and gruesome. He kept it to himself for many years for fear of being ridiculed and labeled crazy. He finally broke his silence to two of his ranch hands, who were also his good friends after retiring to Cody, Wyoming in 1902, instructing one of them to write down the story. This is his story as it's been transcribed to modern day English. I've told you, gents, how I caught Albert Kleist years ago at Tacoma Springs, but haven't told you the full story of what happened the week before. I've kept it to myself all these years for fear of being labeled a liar or a lunatic. As you know, I'm originally from Cheyenne, but had gotten word there was a $1,000 bounty on Kleist's head, who had fled New York for California, so I immediately started making my way down to the old Spanish Trail, as that's most likely the path he'd take, hoping to cut him off. After traveling for over a week, I finally made it to the corner of Utah, Mountain Meadows to be exact. I'd finished dinner as the sun was setting, and it just happened to be a full moon that night, so bright enough I could still see fairly well. I was laying down next to the fire, contemplating ways to find Kleist, when I heard what sounded like several people walking across the pebble-covered ground, not too far off in the distance. I looked over at my pistol sitting in my holster, wondering if I should grab it, but instead decided to listen to see if they were headed my way or not. I'd purposely picked the spot I was in because the ground surrounding me easily made noise, making it hard for someone to sneak up on me, hence me being able to hear them before I could see them. A minute later, they stopped, and I heard a man pleading for his life, which didn't rattle me none. It's what he said at the end that made me jump up. He said, "Dear God, what is that?" Another man, a much younger man, responded, "What are you talking about?" "I saw something, but it can't be," he replied. "Stop talking lunacy. It's not going to save you," the younger man said. It was then I stood up and reached down to grab my pistol when I heard what I thought was a baby crying. My pistol was halfway out of its holster as I stiffened up and thought, what in the Sam Hill is going on? "See, I told you," the man said scaredly. "Untie us now. This ground is bedeviled," a different man said. "Shut your mouths, both of you. I'm doing the Lord's work now," shouted the younger man. By then, I'd snuck up to the edge of the trees and could see they were down on flat ground, in the open, as I stopped and knelt down behind a large juniper. I could see three men kneeling down with their hands tied behind their backs, and a man behind them holding a pistol at one of their heads, who I assumed was the younger man I'd been hearing. I've always been one to mind my own business, and I wasn't fixing to get shot that night, so I waited to see what would happen next. It might be these men have it coming, so who am I to interfere, I thought. I heard the pistol's hammer cock back and readied myself to witness a man's head get split open, when the coo of a baby broke the eerie silence. "Who's there? What do you want?" blurted the young man in a panicked tone as he flipped around. "Lord in heaven, what is going on?" I mumbled to myself as I tried seeing where the sound came from. From my position, it sounded like it was right next to them, but clearly there was no one else there. The squirrely way the young man was acting also told me it was very near them. The men who were tied up started praying out loud, begging for help and forgiveness, when the one closest to me was suddenly knocked to the ground, then swiftly dragged towards the edge of the trees and out of sight. "What in tarnation?" I said aloud as I stood up, watching in dismay, as there was nothing I could see dragging him. "No, no, no!" the man screamed from somewhere in the trees. The two other men stood up and started running the opposite direction as the young man stood there, pistol in hand, not knowing what to do. My mind was racing over what to do. The last thing I wanted was to end up with a bullet in my gut, or being left for the buzzards to pick clean. Something unnatural was definitely going on, though. Never seen anything like it in all my life. The better part of me must have taken over, because I started making my way down to the young man. I had my pistol pointed at him as I waited for him to notice me, but he was still stunned and focused on the two men who were beating foot in the opposite direction. "Drop your pistol now, son," I said as I got within killing distance of him. He immediately turned around, raising his pistol straight at me. "Who the hell are you?" he asked as his arm shook wildly. "Someone who doesn't want to get involved, but I fear I may have no choice. I'm not your enemy, and I have a feeling those men deserve what is coming to them, but I need you to stop pointing that hog leg at me if you want to see the sunrise again," I replied sternly. Even though he looked to be only 18 or 19 years old, he must have been smart enough to realize I'd have killed him without hesitation, as he quickly lowered his pistol when I got within a few feet of him. "What they have coming can never be administered fully on this earth, but they don't deserve to keep on living after what they done," he said. I took notice this young man had to have grown up quickly, based on the way he looked and the fact he didn't speak like a young man his age, but someone more mature, likely due to the pain and torment he'd suffered as a child. This made me respect him quicker than most men I'd met. "What did they do, son?" I asked. He opened his mouth like he was about to tell me when we heard one of the men cry out, "No, it can't be possible. Oh God, help me." We looked at each other with fear in our eyes as we both seen the man get dragged off into the trees by something unseen, which I knew without a doubt neither of us had witnessed before. I lowered my pistol and began walking towards the man who was now crying out, as the young man followed. As I approached the trees he'd ran into, I noticed how thick they were, and this made me nervous. If something were to ambush me, I'd have no time to react. Because of the moon, I could see better than most nights, but being something's next meal was not in my plan. I cursed myself as I murmured, "Damn it, this is why I stay out of other people's affairs." Before going into the junipers, I looked back at the young man, who wasn't too far behind me, and noticed he had this look of stone on his face, which was quite a switch from a few minutes ago. This made me wonder if I was being set up as the patsy. Call it experience or an old habit. "Before I go any further, son, I need that hog leg. I have a thing about strangers being behind me with a loaded pistol," I said as I extended my hand, waiting for him to hand it over. He stared at me for a bit before giving it to me, grip end first. I quickly tucked it in my pants, then proceeded to walk into the trees. I reckon we'd walked about 40 feet before I noticed a large, dark puddle of something on the ground and what appeared to be a small skirmish that had taken place. I knelt down to get a closer look, but it was hard to tell what it was, being the trees were blocking the moonlight. I dipped my fingers in, sniffed it, and knew that smell all too well. It was blood. "Judging by the size of the puddle, I'd say the man is dead," I whispered. He said nothing as he stared at the blood. I stood up and started tracking the small skirmish, which looked as if it had gone on for some time. When it came to an end and couldn't see any more tracks, I knelt down to get a clear view under the trees for any sign of a body. As I scanned the surrounding area, I heard the faint sound of something dripping to the right of me, as I hurriedly turned to look. At first I couldn't tell what it was, and took some time to comprehend what exactly I was looking at. Stuck upside down, in the middle of a large juniper, was the torso of a man. His head and limbs were gone. I thought I'd seen it all in the war, but this was something far more baleful. This can't be a sane man we're dealing with here. Who or what would do such a thing? I thought as flashes of the man being pulled along by some unseen thing raced through my mind. As I stood up to talk to the young man, we again heard the coo of a baby, not too far away. My mind froze as I listened intently when all of a sudden a man yelled out, "What sort of evil are you?" It then sounded like dogs and cats fighting, is the best way to describe it. The survival part of my brain said, "Run back to camp." But I'm no coward. I cocked my pistol's hammer back and bravely walked towards the sound with the young man in tow. The sagebrush and trees made it so I couldn't see much of what was in front of me, and the sound seemed to dissipate the closer we got. It was then I caught slight movement on the ground ahead of us. I paused, glancing back, letting him know I saw something up ahead. I then crouched down as I took each step so I could keep an eye on the movement. When I got within throwing distance, I stopped. If I moved just to the right a bit, I'd have a clear line of sight. I looked over my shoulder, letting him know I was moving up, as I got down on all fours. After a few feet, I was able to see the gruesomeness unfolding before my eyes. What I saw was something I could never fathom. There, on top of the man pulling on one of his dismembered arms, was what appeared to be a 2-year-old child. Holy jumped up Judas Palomino, I whispered to myself. It was then I noticed standing just off to the left of the child, a handsome woman in a dress, staring down at me. The child suddenly stopped what it was doing and looked me straight in the eyes. I scrambled into a kneeling position, pointing my pistol at the child as my arm began shaking uncontrollably. Thinking I might drop it, I used every ounce of strength and courage I could, keeping it pointed at the child, waiting for it to rush me. Right then, I heard the young man stand up. I turned to look as he walked past me towards them. "Son, just what the hell are you doing?" I said loudly to him. Before walking into the clearing, he dropped a wooden cross I hadn't noticed he'd been holding, then went and stood next to the woman. What he said next left me stumped for quite some time until I read what had happened there 15 years earlier. He said, "It is done. Let us go." The child then crawled over to the woman, scurried up her legs and into her arms. They took one last look at me, turned, and walked away, disappearing into the trees. I didn't move for a while for fear I'd be next, although I did have some sense of comfort knowing it wasn't me they were after. They had every chance to kill me, and didn't. When it got light, I investigated the tracks of the woman and young man and took note they abruptly ended when they disappeared into the trees, meaning they up and vanished. What were they exactly? I do not know, but have an idea. I picked up the wooden cross the young man dropped and carry it with me to this day as a reminder. When I read about the massacre that had taken place there, I learned Major James Henry Carleton conducted the Mountain Meadow investigations. In his investigations, he said he found a woman's hair tangled in sagebrush and the bones of a child still in her arms. He said it was a sight which can never be forgotten. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.